There comes a moment when who you've been stops feeling natural. Not wrong, not broken, just forced. You notice it in small ways first. Your usual reactions feel slightly delayed, like you're acting from memory instead of instinct. Habits you once slipped into automatically now require effort. Roles you played with ease begin to feel performative, as if you're wearing something that still looks fine from the outside, but no longer moves with your body. This is not failure. It's a signal. The psyche doesn't announce evolution with clarity. It announces it with friction. When an identity expires, it doesn't collapse dramatically. It starts feeling unnatural to inhabit. The discomfort is subtle but persistent, and it's necessary. Your old identity isn't failing. It's expiring because it can no longer contain who you're becoming. This is usually the point where resistance intensifies. The ego rarely lets go quietly. When identity change approaches, the mind fights hardest, not because the change is wrong, but because familiarity is being threatened. Control increases, overthinking spikes, nostalgia shows up, not as memory, but as persuasion. You suddenly remember the comfort of who you used to be, the predictability, the sense of knowing your place. The fear underneath it all is simple and ancient. If I let this version of me dissolve, what's left? The ego interprets transformation as loss of self, when in reality, it's loss of limitation. Resistance prolongs confusion and pain because it keeps you tethered to an identity that no longer fits. The struggle you feel isn't with life pushing you somewhere new. It's with letting go of who you think you must remain in order to be safe. What makes this phase especially confusing is that growth doesn't feel like becoming someone new. It feels like unbecoming. Instead of adding traits, goals, or labels, things begin to fall away. The roles you carried, pleaser, fixer, performer, strong one, responsible one, start to lose their grip. Not because you consciously reject them, but because they no longer feel honest. You don't have the same energy to maintain them, and that can be frightening, because those roles once protected you. They gave you identity, belonging, and a sense of worth. But what's falling away was never truly you. It was a strategy, a response, a shape you took to survive certain conditions. Unlearning is harder than learning because it requires trust without replacement. You're asked to let go before you're shown what comes next. And yet, authenticity doesn't need to be built. It emerges naturally when false structures loosen. As this happens, emotional detachment often follows, and it's one of the most misunderstood parts of the process. Caring less about certain things doesn't mean you're losing meaning. It means you're no longer emotionally entangled in unnecessary suffering. You react less. You personalize less. You feel less pulled into drama, urgency, or constant emotional negotiation. There's relief in this, even if it feels unfamiliar. For a long time, intensity may have been your baseline. Emotional highs and lows may have made you feel alive, needed, or relevant. When that intensity fades, calm can feel like absence. But this calm isn't emptiness. It's clarity returning. It's self-trust rebuilding. You're not disconnecting from life. You're disconnecting from patterns that required you to suffer in order to feel real. Beneath all of this, your body is often ahead of your mind. The nervous system knows when old threats are no longer real, even if the mind hasn't updated yet. You may notice that situations which once triggered stress no longer produce the same response. Urgency fades. The constant readiness to react dissolves. A strange calm replaces the old tension, and paradoxically, that calm can feel unsettling. After long periods of survival, safety feels unfamiliar. The body doesn't know how to interpret it at first. Restlessness can appear during regulation, not because something is wrong, but because the system is learning a new baseline. Your identity is changing because your body no longer believes the old dangers. And when the body stops bracing, the identity built around bracing becomes unnecessary. This is when the fear of the void tends to surface. The old self is gone, but the new one hasn't arrived yet. There's a gap, an emptiness, and the ego labels this space as danger. It whispers that you're becoming no one, that you should return to old patterns just to feel solid again, that any identity is better than none. This temptation is strong because the void feels undefined. But this space is not emptiness. It's possibility without a shape yet. It's the most creative phase of transformation, even though it feels like nothing is happening. If you rush to fill it, you usually resurrect the old self in a new costume. The gap exists to prevent that. It holds you still long enough for something truer to form. The deeper truth is that identity collapse is not self-destruction. It's integration. When you stop resisting what's falling away, inner coherence begins to return on its own. You don't have to force direction. You don't have to decide who you are immediately. Surrender here is not giving up. It's allowing the psyche to reorganize without interference. The more you fight to preserve the old identity, the longer the discomfort lasts. The more you allow the process, the faster clarity stabilizes, not as an idea, but as a felt sense of alignment. This is why this moment isn't a warning. It's confirmation. You're not losing yourself. You're being released from a version of yourself that did its job and can now rest. The unease you feel is not a sign to panic. It's a sign that the structure you lived inside is dissolving because it's no longer needed. Trusting this process doesn't require blind faith. It requires honesty. Honesty about what no longer fits. Honesty about the exhaustion of maintaining who you were. Honesty about the relief that comes when you stop pretending. Your old identity is losing its grip because it has completed its role. Resisting that only delays your freedom. Letting it loosen doesn't mean you disappear. It means you finally have the space to become without forcing an outcome. The self that emerges from this phase is quieter, less performative, less reactive, but more real. And it doesn't arrive through effort. It arrives when you stop trying to hold together what has already finished. As the old identity continues to loosen, you may begin to notice something unexpected beneath the discomfort. A growing honesty in how you relate to yourself. When you're no longer able to move automatically from habit or role, you're forced into presence. You can't rely on reflex anymore. You have to feel your way through situations that once had scripts. This can feel awkward and exposed, but it's also the beginning of coherence. You're no longer acting from who you've been rehearsing. You're responding from where you actually are. That difference is subtle, but it changes everything. The psyche is shedding what no longer aligns, and in that shedding, it creates space for truth to surface without performance. One of the clearest signs that this process is real is how your reactions slow down. Not because you're suppressing them, but because they're losing relevance. Things that once demanded immediate emotional energy now register and pass. You don't feel the same urgency to defend, explain, prove, or correct. This isn't apathy. It's the nervous system standing down from a state of constant readiness. When the body no longer believes it's under threat, the identity built to manage threat begins to dissolve. This can feel disorienting because for a long time, vigilance may have been synonymous with selfhood. Without it, you may wonder who you are now. But what's actually happening is that your system is discovering it doesn't need to be on guard to exist. This is also where resistance can show up in subtler forms. When the obvious defenses fail, the mind may try to turn the process itself into a problem. You might start questioning whether you're doing this right, whether you should feel more motivated, more passionate, more certain. The ego doesn't always resist change by saying no. Sometimes it resists by demanding improvement, by turning surrender into another task to perform. But identity collapse doesn't respond to effort. It responds to allowance. The more you try to manage the transition, the more tension you create. Letting go here doesn't mean disengaging from life. It means disengaging from control over who you think you need to be. As unbecoming continues, you may grieve the roles that are falling away. Even when they were exhausting, they gave you a sense of purpose. Being the one who holds things together, the one who understands, the one who shows up no matter what, these identities often came with meaning. Letting them go can feel like losing value, but value rooted in self-erasure is not sustainable. What's emerging now is not a louder or more impressive self. It's a more accurate one that doesn't need to earn its place through overfunctioning. Grief here is not a sign you should return to the old self. It's a sign you're acknowledging how much you gave up to maintain it. This grief often carries a strange relief with it. You may feel lighter and sad at the same time. The relief comes from no longer carrying a role that no longer fits. The sadness comes from realizing how long you carried it anyway. Both can exist without contradiction. Integration happens when you allow them to coexist without turning either into a verdict. You don't need to romanticize the old identity or demonize it. It did what it needed to do, and now it's finished. Closure here doesn't come from explanation. It comes from recognition. The nervous system continues to guide this process quietly. As regulation deepens, you may notice that your tolerance for chaos decreases. Not because you've become rigid, but because your body no longer wants to live at that frequency. Loud environments, emotional volatility, constant urgency may feel draining rather than stimulating. This can be confusing if chaos once felt familiar or even comforting. Familiarity often masquerades as safety. When the body learns a new baseline, it begins to reject what once felt normal. That rejection isn't judgment, it's alignment. Your system is choosing coherence over intensity, even if your mind hasn't fully accepted that shift yet. This is also where restlessness can appear. Not the restless urge to do more, but the restless feeling of not knowing where to place your energy yet. You may feel like you're waiting for something without knowing what. The ego interprets this as a void and tries to fill it quickly. But the void is not empty. It's undefined. It exists precisely because the old self has stepped back and the new one hasn't stepped forward yet. This space is essential. It prevents premature identity formation. It gives the psyche time to reorganize at a deeper level than conscious choice. If you rush to define yourself now, you usually define yourself using old language. The pause protects you from that. During this time, surrender becomes less of a concept and more of a lived experience. You stop trying to force clarity. You stop demanding certainty. You allow days to pass without needing them to prove anything. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you receptive. You begin to notice subtle signals you would have missed before, a sense of ease in one direction, resistance in another, a quiet yes that doesn't need justification. These signals don't arrive as grand revelations. They arrive as felt coherence, and they only become audible when the noise of resistance quiets. As surrender deepens, inner coherence starts to return naturally. You may notice that decisions feel simpler, even when they're not easy. The mental debate softens. You don't need to convince yourself as much. Choices that once felt heavy now feel obvious, not because you've analyzed them thoroughly, but because they align. Alignment has a different texture than certainty. Certainty is rigid. Alignment is calm. It doesn't shout, it settles. It's important to recognize that this phase can't be rushed or optimized. There is no shortcut through identity collapse. Trying to accelerate it often creates more confusion, not less. The psyche needs time to integrate the loss of old roles and the emergence of new ways of being. This integration happens below the level of conscious planning. It's felt before it's understood. That's why patience here isn't passive waiting. It's active non-interference. It's allowing the process to complete itself without constantly interrupting it with fear-based decisions. Over time, the fear of the void begins to lose its grip. You realize that you didn't disappear in the space between identities. You're still here, more present, less reactive, less fragmented. The emptiness that once felt threatening starts to feel spacious, not because it's filled, but because you've learned you can exist inside it. This is a profound shift. It means your sense of self is no longer dependent on constant definition. You don't need to know exactly who you are to trust yourself. That trust is what makes the next identity stable when it eventually forms. And when it does begin to form, it won't arrive as a dramatic reinvention. It will show up as consistency, as choices that don't require self-betrayal, as relationships that don't demand performance, as work that doesn't drain you at the level of your nervous system. The new self is quieter, but stronger, less driven by fear, more guided by truth. You don't build it. You allow it to emerge by not clinging to what has already ended. This is why resisting identity collapse delays freedom. Resistance keeps you tied to a structure that no longer supports you. Allowing it doesn't mean you lose direction. It means direction becomes embodied rather than conceptual. You don't need to know where you're going to stop carrying what you no longer need. That alone creates momentum. If you're in this phase now, it's not because something went wrong. It's because something completed. The identity that once kept you safe has done its work. The discomfort you feel is not a sign of danger. It's the sensation of growth without armor. You're learning to exist without roles that required you to shrink or strain. That learning feels vulnerable, but it's also deeply liberating. This moment isn't asking you to define yourself. It's asking you to trust what's falling away, to stop negotiating with the past, to let the old identity loosen its grip without replacing it immediately. Freedom doesn't arrive when you know exactly who you are. It arrives when you no longer need to pretend to be who you're not. And that's what this phase is quietly offering you, if you allow it to complete itself without resistance.